Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Marty Martin, a psychologist with a human resources background who is here to share with you some techniques to protect yourself in this turbulent world of work. Marty, as he likes to be called, will be talking with you today about career insurance.
All right, we've been talking a little bit about some of the changes in the world of work. Some are positive and some have been negative. But I want to focus our attention on a bit is something that may seem a bit odd, and it's called career insurance. So how many of you have career insurance? Raise your hand. Probably some of you are thinking, I don't know, if you tell me what it is, then maybe I could raise my hand. And that will be the focal point of what we're going to talk about today. What is career insurance, why you need it, and what are the 4 basic clauses in any career insurance policy. But when you think about any type of insurance, auto insurance, home insurance, life insurance, health insurance, it protects you against what? Hazards, risks, and catastrophe. How does it make you feel psychologically? You feel more secure. You feel safe. Your loved ones feel more secure. They feel safe. But there are a number of career vulnerabilities that we have out there. I mean, many of them. If you pick up the newspaper, you will read it. If you listen to the news, you'll hear about it. Friends and family members will share stories. And embedded within that, there's some hazards in the workplace. Now, I'd like to ask this question, maybe hear from a couple of you. What are some career hazards that you've experienced in your life?
Downsizing.
Okay, downsizing. That's a big one. Because if you look at what's happened throughout this country, region to region to region, first it was the Rust Belt, then what they called pink-collar workers, now white-collar workers. Fortune magazine did a feature of white males over 50 are an endangered species in the workplace. So things are really transforming in a negative fashion. Didn't used to be that way, but now it's that way. How about for somebody else? What's another career hazard?
Offshore outsourcing.
Offshore outsourcing. That's a biggie right now. If you want to make people angry, you can say offshore outsourcing, except for those that are receiving the contracts. And I like to ask people, when you think about offshore outsourcing, how many of you spend over 80% of your time on a computer at work? Anybody spend over 80% of their time? Okay, now think about it. If you spend over 80% of your time on a computer at work, couldn't you do that job located somewhere else? Naturally. Okay, you could be on the beach like here in California, but actually the home office is in New York. Or you could be where? Another country where there's a cheaper labor market. Okay. So if you really think about it, if you spend more than 80% of your time on a computer, is your job at risk? I would argue it is. So one of the things we're going to talk about is how do you invest in a different skill set and how do you diversify your skills so that way you lessen your risk. Those are 2 principles of career insurance. And I'll give you 2 more. Invest in your skills and development and diversify your skill set. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the day. Yeah, I kind of want to reflect back for a moment because we've been talking about some of the career vulnerabilities, some of the risks. You mentioned downsizing. You mentioned offshore outsourcing. And it kind of takes me back when I was in graduate school. It was 1984. And I was at Rutgers University working on my doctorate in clinical psych, but I was working at AT&T because I had an interest in basically kind of psychopathology in the workplace. So why do bosses act crazy? Why do people act crazy? So I had the classroom experience for part of the time and the real lab at AT&T. Hopefully I don't get sued for the other part of the time. But it could have been any company. It didn't have to be AT&T. But anyway, we worked for a group called the Employee Development and Organizational Effectiveness Group. And at the time, AT&T was called Ma Bell. And its image was it was nurturing, it was caring, it was loving, it was paternalistic in a positive fashion. And they had about 300, maybe 50, 60,000 employees, huge organization. So it was a very nice job. I kind of traveled around the different parts of the country and basically went into work groups that were suffering. And we raised the morale and we increased satisfaction. It was a good thing. And then we got a telephone call. I was in Idaho, of all places, in Boise. Got a telephone call from my boss. He said, you got to get back to Basking Ridge, New Jersey, which is a lovely little community where the headquarters of AT&T was. So immediately went back to Basking Ridge, New Jersey, feeling a bit nervous because my boss had never called me to get back so suddenly. And there was an older guy, and he said, as soon as I got back, he said, Marty, this ain't good. And I said, well, what do you mean it ain't good? And he said, whenever they call these special meetings, it's always something bad. Okay, so I said, ugh. I knew something was up, but I didn't know it was going to be this bad. So anyway, we came into a room like this, and there were 60 of us. And people were appropriately anxious, apprehensive. The tone was a bit somber and tense. Some people kind of laugh when they get a little bit tense, and they were being playful. But Manuel London was our boss, and he's usually kind of smiling, kind of intellectual. But on this day, he was slightly kind of morose and morbid. And he told us, which made me more nervous. He said, Judge Green, and I didn't have a clue who Judge Green was, had issued a consent decree, didn't know what that was, so it was kind of gobbledygook, if you will. But then eventually he got to the point, after he went through all the legal pieces, is that Ma Bell had to break up because it was a monopoly. Remember, Judge Green ruled that they had to break it up into the baby bells. Now that part I could understand. But then the part that really hit me when he said, everybody in this room, if you could imagine, if you were in that room, has 60 days to find a job within the company, 60 days. And you're thinking, okay, I don't know if I can do that, or hit the street. Okay, so that was the stinger, hit the street. So at that point, I felt more nervous, and I knew why I was nervous now. And you kind of looked around at people's faces, all kinds of reactions. Some people were, you could see the rage. I mean, some people you could see the sadness. So it does bring up a lot of emotional qualities when you think about work. I knew the clock said 60 days. So what I did, I said, wait a minute, what is my unique selling advantage? USA, not United States of America, but what's my unique selling advantage? I love working with people. I love helping people, both individually and collectively. Where is there a place within AT&T, but not in my group, because my group is going to disappear, where I could utilize those skills? The Employee Assistance Program is where I utilize those skills. So what that story told me and reminds me of all the time is identify your unique selling advantage and your unique skill assets so that way you can redeploy them, if you will, in case you need to. And then when I did that, I made sure that I made a commitment to myself to continue that throughout my career, which is partly why I'm here, so that you can do that as well for yourselves. Remember I told you about those two kind of principles, kind of invest in your skill set as well as diversify your skill set as well. And I said I was going to tell you two other things. One is that you really have to recognize your surroundings and really monitor what's going on. But when you monitor the changes in the workplace, you have to get somewhat comfortable with sensing things that may be disconcerting. For example, I mean, most of us hate emails, but if you slowly have half the number of emails, then, I mean, smile, but that could be a signal. If your voicemails get reduced, that's a signal. If you're not going to all the meetings or the high visibility meetings, that's a signal. If you're a manager and they take away direct reports or cut your budget a bit, that's a signal. Now, denial is good for a little period of time, but not long term. So you want to make sure that you recognize what's going on, and then you want to think about, okay, what's my step? What do I do? What's my unique selling advantage, if you will? And the last thing is enjoy. Now, my grandfather used to say this quite a bit. It really doesn't matter how much money you make per se, just as long as you can meet your basic survival needs. And let's assume that people will define that realistically, but people will define it differently. But if you enjoy what you do, a couple things will happen. In general, you will be great at it. And in general, people will recognize that. They will see value in that. And then what happens is the money comes. And not just financial money, but psychosocial money. Because if you love what you do, then there's less stress. Because the work that you do buffers you from some of the other stresses. So when you really think about your career insurance policy, recognize what's going on around you, or invest in your skills, diversify your skill set, and enjoy. And that will help you ride through some of the turbulent seas that we're facing in the workplace. Getting ready to wrap up, and what I'd like you to do is really turn to the person next to you and maybe identify maybe one or two things that you may do differently, because that's the most important thing, because you want to take away one or two things. Maybe you'll do something differently, maybe you'll think about something differently, maybe you'll have a different conversation with someone. So if you kindly do that now, turn to the person next to you and think about one or two things you'll do.